the Sinaloa Cartel unleashing deadly riots down in Mexico following the arrest of the son of imprisoned drug kingpin El Chapo.
Once word gets out that El Chapo's son has been detained by the Mexican security forces, like, all hell breaks loose.
October 17th, 2019. Mexican soldiers walk into a house in Culiacan to arrest the son of El Chapo. 3 hours later, the entire city is on fire. 50 caliber machine guns are tearing through residential streets, and the Mexican government is begging the cartel to take their prisoner back. These are the worst cartel combat footage ever captured. For most of the 2010s, the Mexican government had a strange relationship with the cartel war. Officially, it was a criminal problem. Unofficially, it was something much bigger. The numbers told one story: 30,000 homicides a year, mass graves dug up in the desert, entire towns abandoned overnight. But the videos told a different one, because every time a phone came out and started filming, what it captured looked nothing like a crime. It looked like a war. This is the story of how that war went from rifles to rocket launchers to bomb-dropping drones, and how the camera, in every single case, made it worse.
I don't think we've really seen anything like this on this scale in Mexico, maybe ever. Mexico's own security forces don't have the ability to defeat a cartel with,
October 17th, 2019. Around 3 in the afternoon, a Mexican army patrol pulled up to a house in the Tres Rios neighborhood of Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa. They had been tipped that Ovidio Guzman Lopez was inside. Ovidio was 28 years old, a son of imprisoned drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, and a senior figure in what was already being called the Chapitos faction of the Sinaloa cartel. The soldiers entered. They detained Ovidio. He didn't fight back. He just made a phone call. Within minutes, the Sinaloa cartel mobilized across the entire city. Burning cars and trucks were rolled into intersections to block the roads. Cartel gunmen in pickup trucks with 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the beds began rolling through residential neighborhoods. Custom-armored cartel vehicles known as monstruos, monsters, appeared on the streets. Civilians filmed it all from their balconies, their windows, the back seats of cars stuck in traffic. Cartel forces surrounded the house where soldiers were holding Ovidio. They outnumbered the patrol. They had heavier weapons. They attacked 14 separate military and National Guard positions across the city. They seized the 9th Zone military barracks. They broke 51 inmates out of Aguaje prison. They took the families of soldiers hostage, including, by some reports, the family of a general. By evening, the Mexican government did something no government should ever have to do. They released their prisoner. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador defended it on national television, saying the alternative would have meant more deaths. 13 people had already died. More than 20 were wounded. The cartel had just beaten the Mexican army in open combat, inside one of Mexico's biggest cities, and the entire thing had been filmed.
It's just such a remarkable embarrassment for the Mexican government.
Mexico's government claims the new generation cartel of Jalisco used rocket-propelled grenades last Friday to bring down this army helicopter. Mexico's interior minister says the shootdown comes as the Mexican government launches an offensive against the drug trafficking organization.
But Sinaloa wasn't the first cartel to outgun Mexico's military. That distinction belonged to a group from a state to the south, Jalisco, and a man named Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. The world would come to know him as El Mencho, May 1st, 2015. The Mexican federal government had launched Operation Jalisco, a massive coordinated effort to capture El Mencho and dismantle the cartel he had built. 4 Mexican Air Force and federal police helicopters were sweeping a mountainous corridor between the towns of Casimiro Castillo and Villa Purificación. From the air, they spotted a convoy of vehicles winding through the road below. Intelligence suggested El Mencho himself was inside. One of the helicopters dropped altitude to identify the target. It got too close. CJNG operatives on the ground opened up with rocket-propelled grenades. A round struck the tail rotor of a Cougar EC-725, one of the most expensive aircraft in the Mexican military's fleet. The helicopter spun out of control and crashed. 9 people died, 3 soldiers, 2 federal police, and 4 crew members. 12 more were wounded. It was the first time in the history of the Mexican drug war that a criminal organization had shot down an aircraft. The government issued its highest security alert level, and then CJNG showed what real coordination looked like. Within hours, the cartel hijacked 39 buses, trucks, and cars across western Mexico. They set them on fire and used the burning wrecks to block major highways across multiple cities. They torched gas stations, banks, and businesses across Guadalajara, the second largest urban area in the country. The government would later admit that the level of coordination CJNG demonstrated that day had never been seen before from a Mexican criminal group. A line had been crossed. And on the other side of it, the cartels weren't just shooting at police anymore. They were shooting at the sky. Sometimes the CJNG doesn't always need rocket launchers to wipe out federal forces. All they need is a road, a bend in the road, and the patience to wait. October 14th, 2019, just 3 days before Black Thursday on the other side of the country. 2 Michoacan state police officers loaded into 5 trucks for what should have been a routine assignment. They were going to the township of Aguaje to serve a single warrant. The convoy headed into a stretch of road that ran through a town called El Aguaje, deep in CJNG-controlled territory. Some reports later suggested that the wife of El Mencho herself, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, was in the area, and the cartel had mobilized to keep outsiders away. Whatever the reason, the cartel was waiting. More than 30 CJNG gunmen, riding in 5 armored vehicles, had pre-positioned along the road. When the police convoy entered the kill zone, the cartel opened up with .50 caliber sniper rifles, AR-15s, and AK-47s. The officers didn't have the firepower to fight back. They didn't have the cover. They didn't have a chance. When the shooting finally stopped, 13 officers were dead. 9 more were wounded. Some of the bodies were still inside the patrol trucks when CJNG set the vehicles on fire. Then the cartel left cardboard banners on the wreckage, Narco Mantas, signed in big block letters, CJNG. The most disturbing piece of footage from that day wasn't visual, it was audio. The radio calls of the surviving officers begging for backup, narrating the deaths of their colleagues in real time, leaked to a Tamaulipas Facebook group within 24 hours. It went viral across Mexico. By the end of the week, every police officer in the country had heard it. It was the worst attack on Mexican law enforcement in years. And the photos that hit the wire? Burned patrol trucks, lined up on a country road, the cap of an officer lying in the brush, became the defining image of what the cartel war had become.
Este es un video que se difunde un día después de que Gonzalo Insunza, identificado por las autoridades como el Macho Prieto, lugarteniente del Cartel de Sinaloa en la zona norte de Sonora y Mexicali, fue abatido por marinos y fuerzas federales en Puerto Peñasco.
6 years before that ambush, the cameras caught a very different kind of cartel fight. 1 drug lord, 1 beach, and a body that disappeared. December 18th, 2013, the Bella Serena Complex, Sandy Beach, Puerto Peñasco, known to American tourists as Rocky Point, Sonora, a resort area full of beachfront condos and holiday goers from across the U.S. Southwest. Right in the middle of it, in a luxury villa overlooking the Sea of Cortez, was Gonzalo Insunza. Macho Prieto, they called him. He was the chief of sicarios for El Mayo Zambada, the man running half of the Sinaloa cartel alongside El Chapo. The U.S. Treasury had named him to the kingpin list. Mexico had a 3 million peso bounty on him, and he was on Christmas vacation. At around 6 in the morning, Mexican federal forces moved on the complex. What they didn't realize was that Macho Prieto's bodyguards were positioned around the area, armed with Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifles. These are weapons designed to punch through armor. They will go through walls, through engine blocks, through anything you can build a barricade out of. The shootout that followed lasted 4 hours. American tourists in neighboring condos hid in their bathrooms. Mexican Marines moved through the resort complex on foot. Helicopters had to fire on the building itself. Vehicles on the road outside the complex burned. By the time the fighting stopped, 6 people were dead. Macho Prieto, the report said, was one of them. But here's where the story turns, because before the Mexican military could secure the scene, several of Macho Prieto's surviving sicarios spirited his body away. When investigators finally got into the villa, the most wanted body of the operation was gone. They had to confirm his death from DNA they pulled out of blood samples on the floor. The body of one of the Sinaloa cartel's top enforcers has officially never been recovered. A 4-hour helicopter-supported assault on a beachfront resort. American holiday goers ducking under their beds. And the cartel still managed to walk out of there carrying their dead boss, like nothing had happened.
Mientras tanto, elementos de la División de Gendarmería de la Policía Federal fueron emboscados cuando realizaban labores de vigilancia, esto en Ocotlan, Jalisco. El saldo, 5 oficiales muertos y 6 civiles también.
The Macho Prieto shootout took 4 hours and ended with one drug lord. 2 years later, CJNG would show what a real military-style ambush actually looked like. March 19, 2015, just 6 weeks before they would shoot down the Army helicopter. A convoy of the National Gendarmerie, Mexico's newest federal police force only created the year before, was on patrol in a residential neighborhood of Ocotlan, Jalisco. They were doing routine work, pulling up next to parked cars, checking plates. Nothing unusual. As they slowed beside one particular vehicle, gunmen inside the car opened fire. At the exact same moment, more gunmen opened up from rooftops on both sides of the street. It was a textbook L-shaped ambush, the kind military units trained for, the kind you don't expect from anybody in Mexico except the military itself. The officers tried to use their patrol cars as cover, but CJNG reinforcements arrived within minutes and surrounded them. The shootout went on for somewhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours, depending on which witness you ask. By the time it was over, 5 Gendarmerie officers were dead, 4 CJNG gunmen were dead. 2 civilian bystanders had been killed in the crossfire. It was the deadliest attack ever against the National Gendarmerie. The footage, captured by terrified neighbors filming from apartment windows and balconies, showed automatic weapons fire echoing through a quiet residential street. Cars getting shredded, officers ducking behind their own vehicles, returning fire blindly. This was the moment Mexico realized CJNG was different. They didn't just have guns, they had tactics, they had discipline. They didn't run when federal police showed up. They engineered traps designed to swallow federal police whole. The Sinaloa cartel had spent decades building a smuggling empire. CJNG was building something else, something that looked more and more like an army.
This is one image of the violence that officials see at or near the border on a daily basis.
Those clips were filmed from balconies. The next ones came from inside the military convoy itself. September 22, 2022. Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, the border city sitting directly across the Rio Grande from Laredo, Texas. The heart of Cartel del Noreste territory, once the home base of the Zetas, then their successor organization. A Mexican Army convoy was moving through the city at night. The lead vehicle was a Chevrolet Cheyenne, an armored pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the rear bed. The dashcam was rolling. The driver was experienced. He blew through stop signs without slowing. He swerved around traffic in the median. He honked aggressively and pushed his way through every intersection. He knew that stopping in Nuevo Laredo at night meant dying. It wasn't enough. As the convoy passed under a bridge, Cartel del Noreste sicarios opened fire from elevated positions. The dashcam captured everything, the windshield cracking under impact, the cabin filling with the sound of automatic weapons, and the voices of the soldiers shouting in Spanish. "They're shooting! To the left! It's an attack! Shoot them! Shoot them with everything! We're under the bridge! I'm getting out! I'm getting out!" The footage leaked to a Facebook group within days. It spread across Mexico within hours. By the end of the week, it was on Russian, American, and European news outlets. One Mexican soldier, Jose Francisco Jacinto Licer, was killed in the ambush. 7 cartel hitmen died in the firefight that followed. Sedena, the Mexican Defense Ministry, eventually confirmed the engagement. What made this footage different from anything that came before? It wasn't the death toll. It was the perspective. For the first time, anyone watching cartel combat footage could see exactly what it looked like from inside the vehicle being shot at. Hear what the soldiers were hearing. Feel what they were feeling in those first 3 seconds when the windshield starts to break and you realize you are about to die. It was the closest cartel war footage had ever come to looking like a Hollywood movie. Except every second of it was real.
Ante pruebas de ADN, ya se comprobó que los restos de la persona encontrada ejecutada en Navolato, Sinaloa, sí pertenecen a Julio Óscar Ortiz Vega, alias El Kevin, operador de Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán.
Dashcam footage is shocking, but grenade footage is something else entirely. September 30th, 2016, a highway just outside Culiacan, Sinaloa. A wounded man, identified by Mexican authorities as Julio Oscar Ortiz Vega, was being transported in an ambulance under heavy military convoy escort. The convoy included multiple armored vehicles, fully armed soldiers, body armor, automatic weapons. They were moving in the pre-dawn hours specifically to minimize the chance of attack. It didn't matter. Sinaloa cartel gunmen had been tracking the convoy. They hit it with a coordinated ambush that included grenades. Military-grade explosive ordnance the soldiers themselves didn't have. The road around the convoy turned into a kill zone in seconds. 5 soldiers were killed, 10 more were wounded. 2 military vehicles were left completely burned out on the highway. Soldiers' bodies were scattered across the pavement. It was the worst attack on Mexican military personnel since the helicopter shootdown the year before. Local military commander General Alfonso Duarte said publicly that the attack was likely carried out by the sons of El Chapo, the Chapitos, who had taken effective control of the Sinaloa cartel after their father's capture earlier that year. Duarte's words on television afterward were unusually direct. He said the cartel had acted with cowardice. He said they had used grenades while the soldiers had only automatic weapons. He said the fierceness of the attack suggested whoever they were trying to free was somebody important. But the real significance of that ambush wasn't the casualty count. It was what it announced. El Chapo had always kept a low profile. His sons did not. The 2016 ambush was the moment the Sinaloa cartel changed its rules of engagement. They were now willing to attack the Mexican military head-on with explosives in the middle of a public highway before sunrise. 3 years later, those same sons would make the Mexican government release their brother during Black Thursday. Looking back, the ambulance ambush was the warning. Everything that came after was the cartel keeping its promise. Up until this point, the cartel war had been fought with rifles, sniper rifles, grenades, and rocket launchers. Then, the drones came. January 10th, 2022. Tepalcatepec, Michoacan, in the rugged Tierra Caliente region where CJNG was at war with a coalition of local groups called the Carteles Unidos. A community of displaced families from the violence-stricken town of El Bejuco had set up an encampment in the forests. They had fled CJNG advances. Some of the men in the camp were members of local self-defense groups. They thought the trees would protect them. A drone appeared over the camp. It was carrying military-grade C4 explosives. Footage filmed from the drone's own camera shows the first bomb dropping through the canopy. The first explosion, people running in every direction, then another bomb, then another. 3 more fell. The forest started to burn. At least 1 person was injured. About 20 buildings were damaged in the wider attack. The same drone, or another one operated by the same CJNG cell, was eventually shot down. It was recovered with the initials CJNG and RR painted on it. RR for Ricardo Ruiz, the commander of CJNG's Grupo Elite operating in Michoacan. This wasn't the first time CJ&G had used a drone in combat. They had attacked a police headquarters in Aguaje in April 2021, injuring 2 officers. But Tepalcatepec was the first time the world clearly saw what was coming. A criminal organization had deployed an armed unmanned aerial vehicle against a civilian encampment, and then filmed the bombing themselves to celebrate it. Mexican Defense Secretary Luis Crescencio Sandoval would later admit that the cartels had been steadily adopting drone warfare. The military had records of 3 separate cartels using explosive drones, though CJ&G remained the most prolific. The footage from Tepalcatepec looked less like anything from the Mexican drug war and more like footage from Syria or eastern Ukraine. It was the moment cartel combat went aerial in a way nobody had predicted, and it wasn't going to be the last.
A shroud of anguish drapes over another Mexican city, this time Boca del Rio, near the port city of Veracruz. Investigators are examining the remains of 35 bodies that were dumped on Tuesday in the middle of a road in broad daylight.
But the most shocking footage of the cartel war wasn't filmed by a drone or a soldier or a news helicopter. It was filmed by terrified civilians on their phones during rush hour traffic. September 20th, 2011. Boca del Rio, part of the metropolitan area of Veracruz on Mexico's Gulf Coast. Population around 800,000. A tourist city, right next to the biggest shopping mall in the region. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Rush hour. Families driving home from work. Kids in the back of cars heading to dinner. 2 pickup trucks rolled to a stop under a busy overpass and blocked traffic. Masked men with assault rifles got out and pointed their weapons at the cars stuck in the gridlock. Drivers froze. Phones came up. People started recording, hoping someone would see what they were about to die in the middle of. Then the gunmen opened the truck beds. 35 bodies were dumped onto the street. 12 of them were women. The killers left a narco manta, a banner claiming the dead had been Zetas members executed by a new organization calling itself Mata Zetas. Zeta killers. It would later be linked to CJ&G and the Sinaloa cartel. The location was deliberate. At that exact moment, Veracruz was hosting a conference of every top state and federal prosecutor in Mexico. The cartel had essentially mailed the country's law enforcement leadership a message in body bags. The footage of that afternoon, civilian phones, surveillance cameras, news cameras that arrived within minutes, went global within hours. It was the first time most of the world really understood the scale of what was happening in Mexico. Before Veracruz, cartel violence was something most people outside of Mexico read about in newspaper articles. After Veracruz, it was something they watched with the sound on while sitting on their couches. That afternoon under the overpass didn't just kill 35 people. It killed the idea that the cartel war was somebody else's problem. Every entry on this list ties back to one man. He shot down the helicopter in 2015. He ordered the Ocotlan ambush 6 weeks later. He built the cartel that wiped out the convoy in El Aguaje. He flew the drones over to Tepalcatepec. He turned CJ&G from a regional splinter group into the most powerful criminal organization in Mexico. And this is how the cameras finally caught up to him. February 22nd, 2026. Tapalpa, Jalisco, a mountain town about 2 hours southwest of Guadalajara. Inside a gated residential complex called the Tapalpa Country Club, in a cabin tucked into a wooded area, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes thought he was safe. He was wrong. For more than a decade, El Mencho had been the most wanted man in Mexico. The U.S. State Department had a $15 million day, all-our bounty on his head. Every operation against him had failed. Every raid had come up empty. This one was different. On February 20th, Mexican military intelligence, working with the U.S. Joint Interagency Task Force Counter-Cartel, tracked a trusted courier connected to one of El Mencho's romantic partners. The courier led them to the residence in Tapalpa. 2 days later, before dawn on February 22nd, the Mexican Army moved in. 6 helicopters provided air cover. Texas Air Force aircraft circled overhead. Army Special Forces moved on the compound from the ground. As they closed in, El Mencho security detail opened fire, heavy military-grade weapons. 2 firefights erupted, one at the compound itself, and a second in the dense forest, as El Mencho tried to flee on foot. Body camera footage from one of the soldiers, eventually released through Mexican military channels, captured the close-range combat as it happened. Soldiers moving through brush. Automatic weapons fire from multiple directions. A Mexican Army helicopter providing aerial support was hit by CJNG gunfire and forced to make an emergency landing. 8 CJNG members were killed in the operation. 2 soldiers were wounded. Special Forces finally caught El Mencho and 2 of his bodyguards in the woods. All 3 had been seriously wounded. They were loaded onto a helicopter for emergency medical evacuation. None of the 3 survived the flight. But the cartel wasn't done. As news of his death spread, CJNG cells across more than half a dozen Mexican states torched vehicles and blocked highways. Smoke rose over Puerto Vallarta. The U.S. State Department issued shelter-in-place orders for Americans across multiple Mexican states. The Mexican government rerouted his body away from Guadalajara, afraid the cartel would attack the convoy on its home turf. In the rubble at the Tapalpa compound, soldiers found something else: rocket launchers, the same kind of weapons that had brought down the Army helicopter in 2015. They were still there, still operational, still ready. 11 years later, the cartel that had announced itself by shooting an aircraft out of the sky was finally battered by an army that was, this time, ready for what was waiting. Look at these 10 moments together, and a pattern emerges. The cartels didn't just get bigger, they got better. The 2011 Veracruz body dump was meant to terrify civilians. The 2013 Macho Prieto shootout proved the cartels could hold off the military for hours. The 2015 helicopter shootdown introduced rocket launchers. The 2015 Ocotlan ambush introduced military tactics. The 2016 ambulance ambush introduced grenades. The 2019 Aguaje massacre wiped out an entire convoy. The 2019 Black Thursday made the Mexican government surrender on national television. The 2022 dashcam ambush put the war inside the vehicle. The 2022 Tepocatepec bombing introduced drones. And finally, in 2026, the man behind most of it died inside the same kind of operation he had helped invent. Every one of these moments was once unthinkable. The Mexican drug war went from rifles to grenades to RPGs to explosive UAVs to coordinated urban warfare against the military. The cameras kept rolling because the violence kept escalating, and every time someone said it couldn't get worse, the footage doesn't lie, it just records what comes next.